Alright, let's talk about this Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett fight because, man, Chandler cannot afford to take another loss here, man. I know the UFC loves Chandler. The dude is basically their highlight reel factory, but let's be real, he's in a rough spot right now. Chandler is on a 2-fight losing streak, and if he drops another one to Paddy, that's 3 in a row. And while the UFC won't just cut him or anything, because let's be honest, they'll always find a way to throw him into a war or some type of entertaining fight, his record is starting to look rough. The reality is, the only guys he's actually beaten in the UFC are Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson, fighters who at the time were already on a major decline, or just like Tony, who was already declining. But against the elite of the division, he comes up short every single time. Charles Oliveira beat him twice, Justin Gaethje went a war with him and won, and Dustin Poirier finished him in a fight that, let's be honest, looked like another classic case of Chandler going too wild for his own good. These aren't just losses. These are fights that wear on a fighter. Chandler is an explosive athlete, no doubt about it. The dude is built like a tank, built for action, but he's 38 years old. That's no joke. He's not some young up and comer. He's at the tail end of his prime, no matter how much of a genetic freak he is. Now, here's where it gets interesting because Paddy is 30 years old, and that's 8 years younger than Chandler. And that's a big deal. Youth matters in the sport, especially when we're talking about durability and recovery. Paddy has that wild, awkward striking style, but more importantly, he's a legit submission threat because his ground game is sneaky, and if Chandler gets reckless like he always does, he can find himself in some trouble. The UFC sees something in Paddy. Whether fans like him or not, they're investing in him because he's marketable. And if he beats Chandler, that's huge for his career. We're talking about a guy who went from fighting Jared Gordon to potentially almost taking out one of the most explosive lightweights in UFC history. That's a massive leap in my opinion. Now, if Chandler wins, no one will be surprised. It's what's supposed to happen. But if Paddy pulls this off, that's a statement win. It would completely change the way that people look at him. He goes from just being another hyped up fighter to someone who took out a former title challenger and one of the most exciting guys in the sports. And don't get me wrong, I know Chandler could easily just come out, throw some bombs, and put Paddy to sleep. But that's the thing. He has to. If he loses this fight, he's going to start looking like a gatekeeper for the next generation, and that's not what he wants. Trust me, that's not what Chandler wants. Chandler needs this win, but Paddy, he has everything to gain, and that makes this fight even more interesting than people are giving him credit for. And look, man, I get it. People love to hate on Paddy, but you cannot deny that he's improving, and that was shown in his last fight against Bobby Green. Before that fight, Paddy was a little too reckless. He left his chin in the air, swinging wild, and relied too much on his toughness instead of actual defense. But against Bobby, he fought smart, he fought patient, and that's what makes the Chandler fight so interesting. Paddy actually came to this fight with an actual game plan, which, let's be honest, wasn't always the case in the past. He didn't just rush forward like he had something to prove. He respected Bobby's counter-striking and slick boxing, so instead of forcing wild exchanges, he's still at range, using his feints and picking his shots. That was a different Paddy than we've seen before. When Bobby tried to bait him in those little shoulder roll counters and Philly shell tricks, Paddy didn't bite. He kept his hands up. And then the grappling came into play, but not in the way people expect. Bobby was the one who shot first, and it wasn't out of a strategy or well-timed setup, it was out of a desperation because Paddy had been chopping his legs up the entire fight. Early on, Paddy wasn't just throwing random strikes, he was systematically breaking down Bobby with leg kicks, and you could see it was getting to him. Bobby, who relies so much in his movement, so much in his slick boxing, started losing that bounce in his step, and once those legs were compromised, his striking wasn't effective. That's when Bobby panicked and shot for a takedown, and the second he did, Paddy turned it against him immediately. Instead of defending traditionally, Paddy used Bobby's momentum against him, reversed the position, and ended up on top. That wasn't some just lucky scramble. This was Paddy showing real grappling IQ, knowing exactly how to react in moments and capitalize on Bobby's mistakes. Now from there, it was pure domination. Paddy didn't waste any time to settle into position. He immediately started advancing, controlling Bobby's hips, and working towards a finish. And once he locked in that triangle choke, it was over. Bobby had nowhere to go, nowhere to escape, and within seconds, he was tapping at 3 minutes and 22 seconds of the first round. So now looking at this fight with Chandler, I'm telling you, if Paddy fights with that level of discipline, he's got a real chance here. He's not the same reckless kid anymore. He's learning how to fight the right way, and against a guy like Chandler, who thrives in chaos but burns out fast, that could be a problem. I think one crucial part of this fight is that Paddy doesn't need to stand and bang with Chandler. He doesn't have to take that risk. In fact, if Paddy fights smart, he should be looking to grapple Chandler early and often because, honestly, I think he can take him down and control him, mainly because of what we saw Oliveira do to Chandler in their rematch. The second fight showed something big. Chandler struggled against high-level grapplers when they slowed the fight down. In their first fight, Oliveira caught him with the knockout, but in the rematch, Charles went into a much more control-based approach. He took Chandler down, neutralized his explosiveness, and kept him stuck in positions where he couldn't just scramble out. And that's the key, because Chandler's entire game relies on his ability to explode. For years, Chandler has been known for his wrestling, but there's a difference between offensive wrestling and defensive grappling. When he's in control, when he's dictating the pace, he looks great. But when he's the one that's being controlled, when he's forced to fight off in his back or defend against someone who knows how to set traps, he doesn't have the same answer. Oliveira proved that in their second fight by methodically wearing him down, chaining together controlled positions, and keeping him from using his athleticism to escape. And this is exactly where Paddy could have success. He doesn't have to go shot for shot with Chandler, he just has to engage in the grappling exchanges, force Chandler to work, and eventually take away that explosiveness. Paddy isn't a power wrestler, but his submission game is dangerous, and if he drags Chandler into deep water, he can have a similar success to what Oliveira did. The biggest key is that Chandler burns a ton of energy early, and if he can't land a knockout shot, he starts to slow down. Paddy needs to capitalize on that, clinch him up, drag him to the mat, and force Chandler to carry his weight. If he does that, we could be looking at a scenario where Paddy takes over in the later rounds and either submits Chandler or controls him for a decision win. However, even though Paddy has improved in his striking, one of the biggest flaws is his striking defense. Now granted, he's got a great chin, but the problem is he's right there to be hit in close range. And we all know how explosive Chandler can be, especially early in that fight. Whether it's the first round or even later in the fight, you can never really count out that power. I mean, look at what Chandler did against Oliveira. Even when he was getting out-grappled, even when things weren't going his way, he still found a moment to land a big shot. That's just who he is. He's always dangerous, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's all it takes. You know, if Paddy is controlling the fight, looking sharp, and then out of nowhere, boom, Chandler lands that one bomb and drops him. That's the kind of chaos that Chandler thrives in. And look, man, even if Paddy is at range and he's picking his shots carefully, this is Michael Chandler we're talking about. Chandler isn't just going to sit there like Bobby Green waiting for an opening. He's going to force his way in, impose his will, and look to break Paddy with relentless pressure. That's the difference here. Bobby Green is a slick counter striker who likes to fight at his own pace. But Chandler, he's a wrecking ball. He's coming forward. You know, he's throwing bombs and looking to overwhelm Paddy before he even gets the chance to settle in. And this is where things can get dangerous. If Paddy can't take Chandler down early, that means he's stuck dealing with Chandler's explosiveness in the pocket. And that's a bad place to be. Chandler isn't the type to sit back and let you work. He's a bulldozer. He's going to explode into range, throwing looping power shots, and try to put hands on Paddy before Paddy can even think about taking him down. And let's be real, Paddy's striking defense isn't exactly airtight. This is the same guy who throws punches with his chin up like he just doesn't care. We've seen him get clipped before, and he gets away with it with guys who don't have knockout power. But Chandler has that fight-changing power at any moment. The issue is Paddy's striking relies on a lot of confidence, and when he flows in, he can be effective. But if Chandler is in his face from the opening bell, making him uncomfortable, not letting him set his feet, and consistently throwing explosive bursts, then what does Paddy do? If he can't control the range, if he can't get that takedown early, then he's going to be stuck standing there with fire against a guy who throws with bad intentions every single time. And look, Chandler is reckless too. He leaves openings, he overcommits, and he can be caught. He knows he's danger every time he fights. That's the difference. Paddy sometimes fights like he's invincible, like he's willing to eat a few shots just to land his own. But against a guy like Chandler, that's not going to work. If he eats one of those overhand right clean, he's going to either go down or he's going to get rocked really bad. So yeah, Paddy has to get this fight to the ground as soon as possible, and if he doesn't, then he's stuck in a firefight with one of the most explosive guys in the division, and that is not where he wants to be.